Instructions to merge all of that so completely into a divine power that, well, that you essentially cease to exist as a separate, independent entity.
That is intense.
It really is. Today's deep dive is a journey into a highly specific, very intense, and frankly staggering mystical worldview from the early 20th century. And it claims to offer exactly that set of instructions.
It is a profound departure from how we typically think about spirituality today. I mean, if you look at modern spiritual practices, they are usually framed as a way to, enhance our current lives.
Oh, for sure. Like self-care.
Exactly. We meditate to lower our blood pressure, or we practice mindfulness to become more focused at work.
Yeah, or we go on retreats to find ourselves
Yeah.
and become better, more actualized versions of who we already are.
Right. But the source material we are unpacking today, it just flips that entire concept on its head. It is not about self-improvement at all. It is about self-annihilation.
Which is such a wild concept.
Yeah.
And just to give you some context on the source material we're looking at today, these are translated excerpts from a diary.
Specifically a text known as Volume 8, right?
Yeah, Volume 8, with entries dating from June 1907 to January 1909. And it chronicles the internal spiritual dialogues of a mystical figure.
So it's very personal.
Extremely. The text is written from the first-person perspective of a woman who's experiencing these profound visions. And she's having incredibly detailed, intimate conversations with Jesus and occasionally other spiritual figures.
And we should warn you, it is dense.
Very dense.
Yeah.
It is highly poetic, and it pulls absolutely no punches.
Yeah, and because this text dives into such intense theology and honestly some pretty sharp political critiques of the era, we need to be really clear up front.
Yes, definitely.
We are not here to debate whether it's right or wrong, or to take sides or validate its religious claims. We're essentially acting as spiritual anthropologists today.
I like that.
Very
Spiritual
well.
anthropologists. We are not endorsing any of these viewpoints. Our mission in this deep dive is simply to unpack the fascinating ideas and framework contained within this original source material so you can understand this unique perspective.
Right, to see how these concepts like the divine will or this philosophy of redemptive suffering and some really startling socio-political prophecies all function together as a cohesive philosophy.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we open this diary, the very first thing we have to establish is the ultimate goal of a human soul according to this specific framework.
Baseline, yeah.
Right, like what is the highest, most beautiful thing a person can do with their life in this worldview?
Well, the diary entry from June 23rd, 1907 addresses this directly, and the answer is incredibly specific.
What does she say?
So the narrator is having this internal debate about what act is most pleasing to God. She's wondering if it's feeling deep sorrow for one's sins or maybe maintaining a state of peaceful resignation during hard times.
Which both sound like pretty standard religious goals, right?
You do. But the answer she receives from the voice of Jesus is that the most beautiful act is abandonment in the will of God.
Abandonment.
Yeah, and it's described in a very absolute way. The text says it must be so complete that the soul would remember no more that her being exists. Rather, everything for her is divine will.
See, that word abandonment, we hear that today and usually associated with like trauma or neglect or loss.
Oh, absolutely. It has a very negative connotation now.
But in this text, it's framed as the ultimate achievement. And the really fascinating part to me is the comparison the text makes between this total abandonment and feeling sorry for your sins.
Right, because you'd think feeling sorry for your sins is a good thing.
Exactly.
Wow.
It argues that feeling sorrow for your mistakes is good, sure, but it has a fundamental flaw.
Which is?
It leaves your human ego perfectly intact.
Oh, that is such a sharp observation. If you connect this to the bigger picture, if you are sitting there agonizing over a mistake you made 5 years ago, who is the central character of that thought process?
It's you.
It's you. Your ego is front and center. You are entirely focused on your action, your guilt, your history.
Right.
The text actually states that sorrow for one's own sins does not destroy one's own being. But abandoning yourself completely in the divine will destroys your human being so that you can reacquire the divine being.
I mean, to a modern ear, this level of surrender sounds honestly terrifying.
It's a lot to ask.
It's the literal loss of the self.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around how this is pitched as a positive thing.
Right.
Is it like a drop of water falling into the ocean?
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Like when that single drop hits the surface, it doesn't disappear into a vacuum of nothingness. It actually becomes the ocean.
Yep.
It loses its boundary as a tiny, isolated drop, but it gains the vastness and the power of the entire sea.
That analogy captures the metaphysical framework perfectly, I think. When the soul stays merged in the divine will, it reacquires God.
Okay, so it gets bigger, not smaller.
Exactly. And the text from July 1st, 1907, explicitly addresses this idea of past sins and guilt in that exact context. The narrator is observing another saintly figure who constantly thinks about her past sins and asks for forgiveness.
Okay.
And the narrator starts to wonder, am I doing something wrong by not obsessing over my own past mistakes?
Because everyone else is doing it.
Right. But the response she gets is essentially, why on earth would you focus on that?
Wait, really? The divine voice tells her not to worry about her sins.
Yes. The voice tells her that the divine will doesn't produce sins. So if she has successfully merged her drop of water into the ocean, if she is living inside the divine will, she is surrounded by beauty and sanctity and an immensity of goods. And because of that overwhelming surrounding beauty, she literally forgets the ugliness of her past. There's just no room for the memory of sin because her current state is pure divinity.
That is incredibly liberating. But there's got to be a catch.
Oh, there's a massive catch. The text warns that if she steps outside of that divine will, she reacquires her own being, and with it, all the evils of the corrupted nature.
So as long as the drop stays in the ocean, it has the purity of the ocean.
Yep.
But the moment you try to extract that single drop and be an individual again, it's just a tiny, vulnerable drop of water that suddenly remembers all its flaws and limitations.
Exactly. And maintaining that state, staying in the ocean, requires a constant, unwavering alignment. It requires the psychological posture that is beautifully illustrated by a really striking piece of imagery from September 1907.
Okay, what is it?
The text states that to reach divine perfection, a soul must become round.
Round.
Yes, perfectly round.
That visual is completely unexpected. I mean, when you think of holiness or divine perfection, you usually picture, I don't know, light or wings or a mountaintop.
Yeah, soaring imagery.
Yeah, something ethereal. But here, perfection is a geometric shape. It's a sphere. Why on earth does the text demand roundness?
Well, the text explains that the perfection of God's works is visually recognized by their roundness. It points to the physical universe, like looking at the stars, the sun, the earth.
Oh, okay. They're spheres.
Right, they are spheres. But the psychological application is where it gets profound. The text argues that roundness is the same in all of its parts. Therefore, the soul must be the same in all states and all circumstances, whether those circumstances are prosperous or adverse, sweet or bitter.
So, equality must surround her in everything.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. If you are a perfect sphere, it doesn't matter how you are placed on a table. Your height is exactly the same no matter how you're rotating.
You don't wobble.
You have no jagged edges to catch on things, no flat sides to get stuck on. If you have edges, meaning if you react wildly to a promotion at work and then plummet into absolute despair when you get a flat tire, you aren't perfectly aligned.
You have flat sides.
You have flat sides. You aren't rolling smoothly through the will of God.
This roundness is just the ultimate state of equanimity. And what's fascinating is that the text applies this equanimity to our actions and our sense of progress, not just our emotions.
What do you mean by that?
Look at the entry from June 25, 1907. The narrator is experiencing a moment of deep frustration. She feels stuck. She says she feels like she isn't moving forward or backward in her spiritual life.
Which is a feeling you have probably had in your own career or personal growth at some point.
Absolutely.
That haunting feeling of, I'm stagnant, I'm not making progress, everyone else is moving ahead, and I'm just standing still.
Yeah, it's very relatable.
But the text offers this incredible psychological comfort here. The narrator comes to a realization where she says, whether I am behind or still or ahead, as long as I am in your will, I am always fine.
And the divine response she records completely validates that realization. The voice tells her that God himself makes stops within the divine will.
So it's okay to stop.
It's more than okay. The reassurance is that if you remain always in the will, then if the will wants you to stop, you stop, and you actually enjoy the stillness.
Wow.
Yeah. If the will wants you to walk, you walk, but you are walking with the same will. It completely removes the modern anxiety of constant optimization.
It totally dismantles hustle culture on a cosmic level.
It really does.
Your only job is alignment. If the current of the ocean stops, you stop without guilt. If it rushes forward, you rush forward without anxiety. You are just the water.
But that brings up a really difficult question. If total abandonment and alignment is the goal, how does someone actually know if they've achieved it?
Why? How do you measure that?
How does this function day to day when you are dealing with the inevitable friction of real life? The diary doesn't just offer abstract metaphors, it actually provides a rigorous grading rubric.
A rubric for holiness. Okay, so what's the test?
The ultimate litmus test, according to the entry from July 17, 1907, is absolute peace.
Absolute peace.
Yes. The text states that the true sign a soul lives in the divine will is that every single circumstance takes place in peace. The logic is that because the divine will is so perfect, it cannot produce even the shadow of a disturbance.
Okay, let me pause you there.
Sure.
That is an incredibly harsh standard.
Oh, it's brutal.
It says if a soul feels disturbed by mortifications or bitterness, she cannot say she is inside the divine will. So if a coworker insults you, or you face an unexpected financial hardship and you get ruffled by it, you've failed the test.
You stepped out of the ocean.
You're out of the ocean. The text even makes a subtle distinction here that I caught. It says if you feel resigned to the hardship, like you accept it through gritted teeth.
Right, you're white-knuckling it.
Yeah, but you are still internally disturbed by it. You are, at best, only in the shadow of the divine will. You are standing just outside of it, free to feel your own miserable self.
It demands an airtight seal against internal turmoil. There's no faking it.
So how does that even work?
Well, to explain how this mechanism of grace actually operates and why that airtight seal is necessary, the text uses a surprisingly modern analogy in February 1908. It compares grace to an electric current.
Okay, keeping in mind that in 1908, widespread municipal electricity was still a relatively new, awe-inspiring technology for a lot of people.
It was basically magic to some.
Yeah, so the text leverages this cutting-edge tech to explain a mystical concept. Think of your house being fully wired to the municipal power grid. The power of the grace is always flowing. It's infinitely available at the source.
Right.
But if the wires inside your house are broken, or if the light bulb is shattered, the room stays dark.
Exactly. The diary reads, grace is symbolized by electric current, which turns on only those things where preparations have been made to receive the electric current.
You have to be plugged in.
You have to be plugged in and structurally ready to execute what grace wants. If the internal preparation isn't there, the light simply cannot communicate itself, no matter how powerful the source is.
So what are those broken wires?
Yeah.
What actually stops the current from turning on the light inside a person?
The diary is very blunt about this. It's the profound difference between the human will and the divine will. In July 1907, it describes the human will as nothing but a little drop of darkness, all full of disgusts.
Wow. A little drop of darkness full of disgusts.
It is a very visceral image.
It's so bleak.
Contrast that with the divine will, which is repeatedly described as light, heat, and divine tastes.
Okay.
The text explains that if the soul is completely submerged inside the divine will, neither aridities, which are, periods of spiritual dryness or emotional emptiness, nor temptations, nor defects can even enter.
Because the environment is simply too hostile for them. The text says the blinding light of the divine will dissolves that little drop of darkness. Its extreme heat dissolves the coldness of human apathy. If you are truly in this state, temptation can't reach you because the you that could be tempted has already been dissolved in the light.
And this leads to a fascinating contrast the text draws regarding formal religious rituals.
Oh, this part was wild.
Yeah. In April 1908, the narrator is really upset because she isn't able to receive the physical sacrament of communion every day.
Which, in traditional Catholic theology, is a massive deal. Receiving the physical host is considered the ultimate, tangible union with the divine. So her anxiety makes total sense within her religious context.
It's the pinnacle of the faith for her.
Right. But the voice of Jesus tells her not to be bothered by missing it. He points out that the tight union of physical communion lasts, maybe 15 minutes?
A quarter of an hour at most, yeah, as the physical elements dissolve. But living in the divine will is described as a continuous communion. It's not just an event that happens once a day at an altar. It is every hour, every minute, and every breath.
Wow.
It essentially renders the intermittent physical ritual almost secondary to the constant ontological state of being permanently merged with the divine will.
It's like having a battery that never needs recharging versus having to plug it in every Sunday.
That's a great way to put it.
And to bring the psychology of this all together, there's a beautiful, sweeping analogy from March 15, 1908 about storms in the sea. It really solidifies how this state acts as psychological armor.
Oh, I love this passage.
Right. The text notes that when there is a violent storm in the sea, the storm is actually only superficial. The immense depths of the sea remain in perfect, undisturbed calm.
And the narrator observes that when fish detect a storm approaching on the surface, they simply dive deeper to where the water is calm and safe.
Which is biologically accurate.
It is.
Yeah.
And the text applies this directly to human souls. If a soul is empty of God or only contains a tiny bit of God, they are like shallow water. Right, a puddle. A storm comes, like a hardship, an annoyance, a personal loss. And because there is so little depth to the water, the storm agitates the soul from top to bottom. The mud is churned up and everything becomes chaotic.
But souls completely filled with God are the deep ocean. The storms of life have absolutely no strength to agitate them because the chaos is only happening on the thin surface layer of reality.
They are untouched.
Untouched. When the soul detects the storm, she just swims deeper into the endless depths of God and rests. Think about the relentless anxieties of modern life.
Oh, there are so many.
The 24-hour news cycle, the pressure to maintain a personal brand, economic instability, social media outrage. We are constantly living in incredibly shallow water, getting violently churned up by every single breeze that blows past.
We really are.
This text is offering the ultimate psychological armor. It says you have the option to become the deep ocean.
It is a deeply compelling offer for anyone exhausted by the surface-level chaos of life. However, we have to look at the cost of this peace.
Right, because it's not free.
No, it's not. Because the deep peace described here isn't achieved by retreating to a silent meditation retreat or just ignoring the world. Ironically, within this specific theological framework, this profound peace is achieved through intense accepted suffering.
And this brings us to a massive, overarching theme in the text, the concept of the victim's soul.
Yes.
On July 10th, 1907, the narrator asks how much time is left before she goes to heaven. She mentions casually that she is 42 years old, and the voice tells her that her years only actually began from the moment she began to be a victim.
You can say that from that time you began to really live. That's the quote.
That's just...
It sets up a startling paradigm where true life is synonymous with being a sacrificial victim.
Right.
The narrator experiences profound physical and spiritual pain. In that exact same entry, she has a terrifying vision of two massive pillars coming out of the hands of Jesus, and they represent the church and the world.
And these pillars are unimaginably heavy. They are suspended in his hands, and he's growing exhausted holding them up. The vision implies that slaughters and disasters are occurring because he has no place to rest these pillars. They are slipping.
Right.
So the narrator steps up and takes these immense crushing pillars onto her own shoulders, promising not to move from beneath them.
He volunteers for it.
She volunteers. She is quite literally bearing the weight of the world's impending doom to prevent divine wrath from collapsing everything.
It's a heavy, heavy burden.
But as someone looking at this from the outside, hearing that your life only begins when you become a victim of suffering is incredibly tough to digest.
I know.
To a modern listener, this glorification of suffering sounds honestly masochistic. It sounds like a trauma response wrapped in beautiful religious language. Why is being crushed under a pillar, or why is the cross framed as the absolute surest sign of divine love?
It's a completely natural reaction to recoil from that idea. To understand it, we have to contextualize it within the text's own intricate theology regarding the economy of suffering.
The economy of suffering.
Yes. The diary doesn't view suffering as random cruelty. It actually provides a highly mechanical rationale for it. In October 1907, it uses a profound metaphor. It says, "Love is the flame, but sacrifice is the wood that makes the flame burn."
The diary says, where there is more wood, the flames are higher, and the fire is always greater.
Exactly.
So you cannot have a massive roaring fire of love without feeding it the heavy wood of personal sacrifice.
And beyond just fueling love, suffering serves a surgical purpose in this theology.
Surgical.
Yeah. On October 4, the text explains the function of the cross. The cross isn't just arbitrary pain inflicted as a punishment. The cross is described as a grafting tool.
A grafting tool.
The text says, "It was with the cross alone that I grafted the divinity to lost humanity."
Okay, think of a botanist grafting a branch onto a tree. You can't just tape a severed branch to the bark and hope it grows.
Yay, that won't work.
You have to cut into the living tree. You have to create a deep wound in order to bind the new branch directly into the life source, the sap of the trunk. So the text is arguing that humanity is a severed, dying branch, and the cross, the intense suffering, is the necessary incision required to graft us back into the divine life source.
It's a painful procedure, but a life-saving one. The text even compares the situation to a rich man who has lost all his riches and is suddenly presented with a guaranteed means to reacquire them.
You do any...
He would eagerly put his own life, his own sweat and blood into that means to get his wealth back. In this framework, the cross is framed not as a tragedy, but as the richness of the soul, the active instrument of salvation.
It is the tool that binds the drop of water back into the ocean.
Yes, beautifully put.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because what's fascinating is how the nature of this suffering actually evolves over the course of the diary.
It shifts dramatically.
It does. For the first part of these entries, the suffering is incredibly visceral and physical. She describes feeling thorns being physically pressed into her head. She feels beaten and broken. She is experiencing the outward, visible pains of Calvary.
The classic stigmata imagery.
Right. But then in January 1909, there is a total paradigm shift.
On January 27, 1909, the narrator is feeling useless. Her visible, dramatic physical sufferings have seemingly stopped.
Just gone.
Yeah. She feels like she is left with nothing but, as she calls it, squalid misery and a natural, mundane rheumatism.
Which is just everyday joint pain.
Right. The mystical outward signs of being a chosen victim seem exhausted. She asks the divine voice, "What is the purpose of my life now?"
Yeah. The response redefines her entirely. Jesus tells her, "Do you know who you are? Luisa of the Passion of the Tabernacle."
Not Calvary.
Right. He explains that when she shared his visible, bloody pains, she is of Calvary. But when she doesn't have those visible signs, she is of the tabernacle.
And this represents a brilliant theological evolution within the text. Let's unpack the imagery for a second.
Sure.
The tabernacle is the ornate, locked box on a Catholic altar where the consecrated communion bread is kept. Inside that box is the physical, real presence of Christ, according to the theology.
But it shows absolutely nothing on the outside.
Exactly.
There are no visible crosses, no visible thorns, no blood on the bread. It looks completely ordinary.
But the text argues the immolation, the sacrifice happening in the tabernacle, is the exact same as the sacrifice on Calvary. The prayers are the same. The offering of life continues unabated.
It's just hidden.
It's just that the sacrifice has become entirely hidden, completely internalized, and invisible to the outside world.
It really mirrors a mature spiritual evolution. The visible, dramatic, stigmata-like suffering transitions into a silent, unglamorous suffering.
Which is often harder.
Yeah. Yet this hidden suffering is supposedly just as effective, if not more so, at holding up those massive pillars and holding back the worldly chastisements we mentioned earlier.
But that begs the next question.
Right. If taking on this immense suffering, whether visible or hidden, is supposed to hold back divine wrath, what happens when humanity's actions become so incredibly corrupt that the suffering of the victim's soul just isn't enough to balance the scales?
That question brings us to the apocalyptic shift in the diary.
It gets dark.
It does. Because the text doesn't stay confined to the interior of the soul, it crashes headlong into the geopolitical reality of the early 1900s. Throughout late 1907 and 1908, the diary shifts its focus from the intimate mechanics of grace to macro-level world-altering events.
We're talking visions of revolutions.
Yes, recurring, terrifying visions of revolutions, places devastated, entire towns buried under rubble, and the institutional church being violently attacked.
In August 1907, she describes seeing a general uproar. People are entering churches, stripping altars bare, and actively trying to kill priests.
It's chaos.
She's horrified by the violence. But what's fascinating here is WHO, the text, blames for this impending societal collapse.
Yeah, you'd expect it to blame the revolutionaries.
Right. It doesn't just blame a vague concept of secularism or abstract evil. It explicitly and repeatedly points the finger at the wealthy elite and the clergy.
The socioeconomic critique embedded in this mystical vision is blistering. If we look at the entries from May and June of 1908, the text provides a fierce condemnation of wealth inequality.
Oh, it really does.
The voice of Jesus says, "The rich have been the first to give a bad example to the poor. The poor have nourished themselves with their poisonous slobber."
The imagery is brutal. It says the poor were literally poisoned by the bad example of the rich.
Yes.
The text states, "I am tired of the rich. How much money wasted on balls, on theatricals, on useless trips, on vanities. Had they given them only what they spent on unnecessary things, my poor would have been happy."
Yeah.
I mean, this sounds less like a private mystical diary and more like a revolutionary manifesto.
It really does. And it's crucial to remember the historical context here. Early 20th century Italy was rife with extreme poverty, agrarian unrest, and a massive, massive wealth gap.
A powder keg.
Yes. The text frames the impending revolutions not as random, senseless violence, but as a tragic, almost inevitable reaction to systemic greed. The poor, denied basic dignity and bread, while the rich amuse themselves with lavish theatricals, eventually become enraged.
And the critique doesn't stop with the secular rich.
No, it goes after the pious folks, too.
The narrator tries to defend some people to God, asking, well, what about the devout ladies who give alms? And the priests?
And the response shuts her defense down completely.
Oh, it destroys it. It excoriates these devout ladies for doing performative charity. It says they only give money to hold people at their service, to feed their own egos and feel powerful, but they refuse to give a single cent for bare necessities.
It's transactional.
It's totally conditional charity designed entirely to maintain their own social status and keep the poor dependent.
And regarding the priests, the text is even harsher. It claims the clergy only have time for the wealthy. They send the poor away, even pretending to be ill to avoid confessing them.
Pretending to be sick.
The text explicitly blames this clerical elitism and corruption for driving the working class away from the church and the sacraments. It is a stunning, unvarnished indictment of the institutional priorities of the era.
It ties spiritual decay directly to material inequality. And this apocalyptic tone isn't just theoretical fear-mongering. There is a massive, devastating historical anchor right in the middle of these pages that forces us to realize the text is grounded in real historical trauma.
It's eerie.
On December 28, 1908, the narrator casually records feeling the earth shaking violently and hearing a voice telling her earthquakes. She writes that about 5 hours later, she felt a massive earthquake sensibly.
And for anyone who knows their history, December 28, 1908 is the exact date of the Messina earthquake in Sicily and Calabria.
The exact date.
To understand the scale of this, it was a 7.1 magnitude quake, immediately followed by a 40-foot tsunami.
Good Lord.
It nearly erased the cities of Messina and Reggio Calabria from the map. It killed an estimated 75,000 to 82,000 people in a matter of minutes.
In minutes.
It remains one of the deadliest, most catastrophic earthquakes in European history.
And this diary entry, written as the ground is literally settling, frames this catastrophic event not as random plate tectonics, but as a tragic necessity brought on by the exact human blindness and corruption we just talked about.
It's framed as a consequence.
The narrator is deeply horrified, obviously, thinking about the tens of thousands of poor people buried alive under the rocks.
And her empathy extends to the physical communion hosts as well, the sacramental presence of Jesus in the Catholic churches that were destroyed.
Right.
She expresses profound sorrow for God being trapped under the rubble of these collapsed cathedrals.
But the response she records receiving on January 6, 1909 is absolutely chilling. Jesus tells her that his lot, buried under the dirt and the earthquake rubble, is actually less nauseating than being in their pristine tabernacles of the surviving churches.
The reasoning is staggering. The text claims that because of the sacrileges, the unchecked ambition, and the scandals of corrupt priests, the spiritual darkness inside those beautiful, intact churches was so vile that being crushed under rocks alongside the dying was preferable to God.
It's an incredibly shocking statement. It takes this lofty, ethereal mysticism about spheres and oceans and slams it violently into the gritty, bloody, physical reality of the era.
It doesn't hold back.
It suggests that the corruption of the human ego, especially when it's dressed up in religious authority or wealth, is more destructive and abhorrent to the divine than a natural disaster that kills 80,000 people.
It really puts the ego front and center as the ultimate evil. And having explored this immense macro level of world events, earthquakes, and divine justice, the diary eventually returns us to the hyper-intimate relationship between the individual soul and God.
Right back to the micro level.
Yeah, it scales all the way back down to explore how this framework views the very nature of human waiting, and more importantly, human questioning.
And it introduces a concept in January 1909 that completely reframes how we think about patience. It introduces the idea of God becoming a debtor to the human soul.
A debtor. God owing you something.
Right. The context is that the narrator is lamenting that God makes her wait so long for his presence, she feels deprived and ignored.
Which is very human.
Very human. And the response she receives flips the power dynamic in a deeply unexpected way. Jesus tells her that when he comes to her spontaneously, without making her wait, she is his debtor. She owes him thanks.
Makes sense.
But when he makes her wait, when he delays his presence, he actually becomes her debtor.
Do you think it is trivial that a God gives you the occasion to make him your debtor? That's the framing. It's like a metaphysical bank account.
Exactly.
The text distinguishes between two types of grace. There are spontaneous gifts, which are like a surprise bonus at work you didn't expect or earn.
Nice to have, but you didn't work for it.
Exactly. And then there are gifts of bond.
So what are gifts of bond?
Well, the gifts of bond are the crucial mechanism here. The text uses an analogy of a wealthy gentleman holding money for two different people. One person has deposited their own hard-earned money with the gentleman. The other hasn't deposited a cent. If both people suddenly need help, the one who deposited money has the confidence, the actual right to walk up and demand a withdrawal.
Because it's their money.
Right. They can boldly say, "Give it to me, I'm asking for what is mine." The other person, who has no deposit, has to grovel and hope for charity.
That makes total sense. So when you are in a prolonged period of spiritual dryness, or you are waiting for an answer to a prayer, or you feel completely abandoned by the universe, you aren't just suffering uselessly.
You're doing something active.
If you wait with patience, you are making massive deposits into this metaphysical account. You are accumulating divine capital. God is going into debt to you, which gives you the bold confidence to demand grace later.
It completely reframes the experience of delay. Waiting is no longer a passive, agonizing punishment. It is an active, highly valuable accumulation of a credit with the divine.
It's an incredibly practical psychological tool for enduring periods of depression or spiritual silence, because it assigns immense value to the act of waiting itself.
It does. But you can only accumulate this credit if you wait with total surrender.
The catch.
Always a catch. Which brings us to one of the most striking and, frankly, difficult passages in the entire source material. On January 30th, 1909, the text presents a full-scale, uncompromising condemnation of the word why.
And the word why? Just the word.
Just the word. The entry begins with the narrator hearing a soul in purgatory say that if you appreciate suffering, you are doing well, because appreciating suffering means appreciating God.
Okay, standard theology so far.
Following this, the voice of Jesus laments that creatures constantly, endlessly repeat, why this illness? Why this interior state? Why this scourge?
Because we always want to know what.
Exactly. And then it drops this absolute hammer. It says, do you know what why is? It is egoism. Do you know where why was created? In hell. Who was the first one that pronounced it? A demon.
Wow. Yeah.
It claims that asking why is the destruction of divine wisdom in human souls.
So what does this all mean? The text is making a massive philosophical claim here. Wait, hold on. As someone who loves science and human progress, hearing that the word why is a demon created in hell is incredibly tough to swallow.
Oh, it goes against everything modern society teaches us.
If we didn't ask why, we'd still be living in caves.
Yeah.
Why does fire burn? Why do people get sick? Why do the planets move? Asking why is the literal foundation of human intelligence, medicine, and philosophy. How does this theology justify killing curiosity?
It's a jarring statement, but we have to read it within the specific boundaries of this spiritual framework.
Okay, set the boundaries.
The text isn't condemning scientific inquiry. It isn't telling you not to ask how a combustion engine works or why a bridge collapsed. It is specifically addressing the act of asking God why in the face of suffering or circumstance.
Oh, I see.
Why this illness? Why this earthquake? In this mystical ecosystem, asking God to explain himself is the ultimate refusal to surrender to the divine will.
It's the ultimate assertion of the human ego. By asking, why did you do this to me? You are demanding that the creator of the universe justify his actions to you. Right. You're putting yourself on the judge's bench, slamming the gavel, and putting God on trial.
That's a great visual. The text claims that the true explanation of why is not written on earth. It is written in heaven. Asking it here on earth is an expression of deep egoism because it implies that if you don't understand the reason, you won't accept the reality.
It makes your limited human comprehension the absolute prerequisite for your obedience and your peace.
Exact.
Which completely shatters that perfect sphere we talked about in the very beginning.
It absolutely does.
You lose your roundness. If you're constantly asking why, you are growing up jagged, sharp edges of doubt and resistance. You get stuck on every single circumstance because you refuse to roll forward until you have an explanation.
We can connect this directly to an entry from exactly 1 month prior, December 30th, 1908. The text discusses the infancy of Jesus. The narrator is meditating on the nativity and asks why Jesus chose to come as a helpless, fragile infant rather than a fully formed adult.
Wait, the irony is that she literally asks, why all this?
Yep.
Right before the entry that condemns the word why.
She does. It's so human of her. And the answer she receives is that he came as an infant specifically to divinize the actions of infancy, to divinize helplessness.
Okay, think about a true infant.
Right.
A baby doesn't ask its parents why it is being moved from the crib to the floor, or why it is being swaddled, or why it has to sleep now. It simply exists in a state of absolute, unquestioning dependence and trust.
True abandonment, the exact concept we started this entire journey with, requires the unquestioning trust of an infant. It requires you to take that rebellious, demanding intellectual why and bury it in the dirt.
The text actually takes it a step further and says that why will eventually be buried in hell to make the demons restless for eternity.
It's quite the punishment.
Because the art of why is to wage constant war against the soul and never ever give it peace. If you are always demanding to know why a tragedy happened, why you didn't get the job, why life is unfair, you will never achieve that deep ocean calm we talked about. The surface will always be churning.
You'll always be in shallow water.
We have covered immense, challenging ground today. We started with this radical metaphysical blueprint for the total annihilation of the human ego, abandoning oneself so completely into the divine will that you forget your own past and achieve this state of perfect roundness, unaffected by the storms on the surface of life.
Right. And then we explored the hidden, complex mechanics of the victim's soul, discovering how internal, invisible suffering is framed as the necessary wood that fuels the fire of divine love and acts as a botanical graft, connecting humanity back to divinity.
We looked at those staggering prophetic socio-political critiques too, the fierce warnings against wealth inequality, performative charity, and clerical corruption, all grounded in the tragic historical reality of the 1908 Messina earthquake and the rubble of fallen churches.
And finally, we examine the fascinating theology of making God your debtor through patient waiting and the ultimate difficult requirement to surrender our intellectual ego by burying the question why.
It is an intense, demanding, and utterly cohesive worldview. But as we wrap up, there is a final thought that builds on everything we've discussed today, and it's something really worth mulling over.
Yeah. This text, from start to finish, demands the complete destruction of the human ego. It forbids asking why and demands total submission to a divine will. But think about the modern era we live in today.
It's the exact opposite.
Our entire culture is built on the exact opposite premises. We are constantly taught to find your own truth, to assert your individuality, to build your personal brand, and to relentlessly question reality.
We celebrate the ego.
We do. If this text, written over a century ago in a quiet room in Italy, is right in its spiritual diagnosis, is our current age of hyper-individualism and endless information actually the ultimate rebellion against the divine will?
It's a heavy question.
Are we building an entire world out of the very human will this diary warns is just a tiny, miserable drop of darkness?
Are we just a billion little drops of darkness violently refusing to become the ocean?
Yeah.
It brings us right back to that metaphysical blueprint we started with. We have the instructions to dissolve the self. The lingering question is, in a world that completely worships the self, would anyone today actually have the courage to follow them? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.